Hello educators and learners. Today, I'm gonna be sharing with you my second Edutech video kung saan i-share ko sa inyo how I made my synchronous presentation using the available apps online. By the way, thank you so much for dropping by in this channel. If you're interested kung paano ko ginawa ang aking asynchronous presentation with the help of online apps and of course with the mentoring from my fellow educators, just keep on watching. And I will show you as well yung presentation ko sa Google Classroom in my post-grad. Welcome po ulit dito sa ating second video, which is entitled The House of Asynchronous Presentation, utilizing the available online apps. The contents of this video are classified into 3 stages. We have the intro to asynchronous learning. The next stage will be the tools we need for asynchronous learning. And the last stage is the actual asynchronous presentation. So without further ado, let's begin. To start with our intro for asynchronous learning, let's define first what is asynchronous. Asynchronous means not keeping time together, which refers to our ability to access information, demonstrate what we've learned, and communicate with classmates and instructors on our own time. Or we don't have to be in the same classroom or even in the same time zone to participate. In other words, if we're asked to do a synchronous presentation, we're going to be recording ourselves like we are presenting in the class. And we're going to do that using different productivity enhancing tools that we found online. Alright? The importance of the asynchronous learning opportunities gained momentum noong nagsimula ang COVID-19 pandemic. Not because there is pandemic, education should stop. Pandemic has actually opened the door for digital classroom. At yung Pilipinas ay mabilis na naka-adapt sa technology, considering that most of Filipinos spend so much time in social media nowadays. Most of the learners at the tertiary level, or even in postgraduate level, involves themselves towards the tool Google Classroom to complete their tasks, tests, and assignments. The asynchronous learning process gets facilitated by the active participants, that is the teacher and the learner as well. So number 1 productivity tool in asynchronous learning is the Google Classroom, wherein teachers and students can post and engage in discussions in their most flexible time. Normally, students get invited through Gmail by a teacher to join a class in Google Classroom. And in the classroom, student can post their outputs in any media format like image, video, or text in the Stream tab. They can also make announcements and other learners can comment just like in Facebook. So, what are the tools we need to prepare for asynchronous learning? Of course, we need the basic stuff like laptop and internet connection. Preparing your slide presentation, we can use Microsoft PowerPoint or Google Slides. But in my case, I prefer using the Microsoft PowerPoint. There are already templates that you can use in the software. But if you would want something different, I would recommend you to use an online app which is free for educators. So yun ang Canva. Canva gives you a whole lot of multimedia elements which could be useful in our educational engagements. You can access it through the web. Just type in canva.com and use your debit email to access free resources for education. And if you're using naman the mobile phone, you can download Canva app in your Play Store or App Store. What's good about this app? It gives you a massive resources for free such as video, presentation, Instagram post, Facebook post,
animated social media card, resume, flyer, invitation, and a whole lot of multimedia stuff. And you can simply use the templates, edit, and download. So for my PowerPoint, I did not use any templates in the software, but I used presentation in Canva. The interface is just so user-friendly that you can easily drag and drop elements. So, ginamit ko yung templates from Canva. I edited the text, I edited the animation, and saved it as .gif format. Tapos, I downloaded it. So, pagkatapos ko siyang ma-download, I copy and paste it to my PowerPoint and repeat the process. So, after I'm done with my presentation, I'm gonna need to deliver it and record. So, I created a Facebook group so I could stream my broadcast. I am doing the presentation using the StreamYard free account and I stream it to a private FB group. After I'm done with my presentation, the broadcast and the FB group will be available to download. So, after downloading my broadcast, I use a video editing tool on my phone to edit the video, and then voila! I uploaded my video in our Google Classroom. Okay, so in summary, yung tools na pwede natin gamitin to create a synchronous presentation are PowerPoint, Canva, FB Group, StreamYard, and Google Classroom. So, there are many essential features po yung bawat app na ito, and sobrang helpful nila if you spend time exploring and navigating each of them. So, to my fellow educators out there, please do not hesitate learning online tools. Sobrang magagamit nyo sa classroom and office. And of course, once na-master natin yung mga skills na ito, there are many certifications like Google Educator Level 1 and Level 2 na pwede nating subukan, and it will become an attractive addition to our portfolio as teacher, as trainer, or as an educator, especially that most of agencies and companies today are actually in demand of skilled people in terms of digital tools. Now, I want to share with you some of my best practices in making an effective, elegant, and appealing slide presentation for asynchronous learning. Just a disclaimer, my friends, this is based on personal experience, and maybe it could also help you decide on your own. Either way, there is no perfect or standardized format. It will always depend on your context. Alright? So, number 1, balance creativity. You have to make sure na hindi natin na-overdo yung creativity, and at the same time, we have to make sure that our visuals are appealing. When I say balance creativity, it also encompasses consistency with our animation, with the design, with the font style, and of course, with the text. And as part of balancing creativity, we have to make sure that there are no distractive elements in your slides. There are no irrelevant graphics, sound effects, and any other media elements that doesn't have anything material to the text being presented. Tapos number 2, provide an outline at the start of the presentation. You would want your audience to be interested in your topic. The best way to engage them is to provide them a clear overview of what's going to happen in the next few minutes. In this manner, you are already establishing a connection with them. And at the same time, you are giving them a preview of the whole thing. And then number 3, always begin with a short introductory remark. Presenting asynchronously means your audience doesn't see you in real time, and some of them may not know you. So at least provide a short introduction of yourself to make your audience relate to what you are saying, especially if you are someone with a similar interests and background. Number 4 is start with a powerful and engaging quote or phrase. Usually when doing an asynchronous presentation, your audience can only interact by commenting in your stream. So present a powerful quote which is relevant to your topic and ask them to reflect. Number 5, relate your topic to real-world scenario. Making your topic relevant and interesting for your audience is not easy to establish. So the best way I do it is to connect my topic to what's happening around, especially to what's going on in the present time. This way, your audience can simply relate. And number 6, This is the most important. Don't forget to cite references. Always cite your references. Information online is massive, but you have to be responsible to acknowledge the sources. It also adds credibility points in your presentation, and at the same time, it makes you safe from copyright infringement. Okay, so I hope I was able to help you in preparing your slide presentation. And this time, I want to share with you my asynchronous content. You can comment or give your reactions. I would really appreciate it. As educators, we should always be open to learn new things and to learn from others.
Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to meet you online. Today, I wish you could join me in learning together one philosopher's life and life hacks. My presentation is entitled Karl Marx and His Hacks. I am tasked to present Karl Marx, and I use the term hacks to connote something digital, something very present, and to actually mean that until this digital era that we are in, we can still relive the ideals of this philosopher. All right, there are many documentaries that talks about life of Karl Marx online, but today we're just going to pick some important and relevant details which will highlight Karl's contribution to our generation at large. In the next few minutes, we will be talking about some important milestones in the life of Karl. As I hover to Biographical Notes, we'll be learning how he was able to contribute to development and what is this philosopher's impact to our education. And finally, we will be able to understand how he made noise and end up motivating social change and further affecting economic landscapes. But before that, let me first introduce myself. I am Jeremy Atad. I am an educator since 2013. I was a classroom teacher for 7 years before I got into the National Educators Academy of the Philippines and the DepEd Regional Office 5. I'm a certified trainer of TESDA for events management, front office services, and travel services. I am a very busy person, but I want you to know that I always want to learn something new, and I always love meeting new people. So there. All right, so let's start with my presentation with this quote from Karl: "Ignorance never yet helped anybody." Let me say it again: ignorance never yet helped anybody. This quote reminds us to stay out of ignorance. I mean, being an ignorant is not an excuse that you should stay where you are and that you should not strive for more heights. For instance, in our workplace now that we are facing the challenge of pandemic and restricted gathering, everything is just happening online. You could not be a contributory worker if you don't strive to learn online tools. These tools are very essential and relevant today because meetings, conferences, seminars, and event like trainings are happening remotely, just like this online class that we have. That is why when we roll trainings in the field, we actually motivate teachers of DCOL to learn the digital classroom, because even though there is modular distance learning, we could not reject the fact that digital classroom will provide even more holistic approach to our learners to learn and explore many things. So again, according to Karl, ignorance never yet helped anybody. But why do you think we should believe in this philosopher? We all have our own definition of knowledge and ignorance. So may I request everyone to comment in our stream, what can you say about ignorance? All right, so let's start with the biographical notes of Karl Marx. Karl Marx was born in Trier, Prussia, which is Germany in the present time. And he was born on May 5, 1818 to Heinrich Marx and Henrietta Pressburg. Marx's parents were Jewish, and he came from a long line of rabbis on both sides of his family. However, his father converted to Lutheranism to evade anti-Semitism prior to Marx's birth. So basically, Karl Marx came from a bloodline of educator or rabbis, and just to avoid discrimination for being Jews, his father converted to Lutheranism. More so of his biography, he was educated at home by his father until high school, and in 1835, at the age of 17, he enrolled at Bonn University in Germany, where he studied law at his father's request. He was more interested in philosophy and literature. And following that first year at the university, Marx became engaged to Jenny von Westphalen, an educated baroness. They would later marry in 1843. In 1836, Marx enrolled at the University of Berlin, and there he joined a circle of brilliant and extreme thinkers who were challenging existing institutions and ideas, including religion, philosophy, ethics, and politics. Marx graduated with his doctoral degree in 1841. So Marx turned to writing and journalism to support himself. And in 1842, he became the editor of the liberal Cologne newspaper, Rheinische Zeitung, but the Berlin government banned it from publication the following year. Marx left Germany, never to return, and spent 2 years in Paris, where he first met his collaborator, Friedrich Engels. He was chased out of France by those in power who opposed his ideas. Marx moved to Brussels in 1845, where he founded the German Workers' Party and was active in Communist League. Marx networked with other leftist intellectuals and activists, and together with Engels, wrote his famous work, The Communist Manifesto. And it was published in 1848, contained the famous line, "Workers of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains." After being exiled from Belgium, Marx finally settled in London, where he lived as a stateless exile for the rest of his life. Marx worked in journalism and wrote for both German and English language publications. From 1852 to 1862, he was a correspondent for the New York Daily Tribune, writing a total of 355 articles. And he formulated theories about the nature of society and how he believed it could be improved, as well as actively campaigning for socialism. He spent the rest of his life working on a 3-volume tome, Das Kapital, which saw its first volume published in 1867. It aimed to explain the economic impact of capitalist society, where a small group, which he called the bourgeoisie, owned the means of production and used their power to exploit the proletariat, the working class that actually produced the goods and enriched the capitalist czars. Engels edited and published the second and third volumes of Das Kapital shortly after Marx's death. While Marx remained a relatively unknown figure in his lifetime, his ideas and the ideology of Marxism began to exert a major influence on socialist movements. Shortly after his death, he succumbed to cancer on March 14, 1883, and was buried in Highgate Cemetery in London. So those are the important milestones of Karl Marx. Let's have a short recap. Marx came from a long line of educators on both sides of his family. He joined a circle of brilliant and extreme thinkers who were challenging existing institutions and ideas, including religion, philosophy, ethics, and politics. He was chased out of France by those in power who opposed his ideas. And Marx networked with other leftist intellectuals and activists, and together with Engels, wrote his most famous work, The Communist Manifesto. He spent the rest of his life working on a 3-volume tome, Das Kapital. And he has influenced socialist movements only after his death. So based on these notes, we can picture out that this philosopher is a communist. And being one, he was able to affect society and the generations, but it only happened shortly after death. And up to this day, the ideals of communism continue to be a vital part of the society, more specifically in the Philippines, where the voice of the people could influence important legislations of our time.
All right, so that's for the biographical notes. Let's proceed to his influence on development. According to Marx, human civilization has manifested itself in a series of organizational structures, each determined by its primary mode of production, particularly the division of labor that dominates in each stage. So we have four stages according to Marx, and we have the first one, the tribal. The second one is the primitive communism. The next is the feudal or state property, and finally, we have the capitalism. Let's get to know each of the stages. The tribal. The tribal form. Tribal society has no social classes, but is structured around kinship relations, with hunting the province of men and domestic work the province of women. The tribal form, according to Marx and Engels, is quite elementary at this stage, a further extension of the natural division of labor existing in the family. During this stage, it is also possible to see a slave culture established, particularly as the population increases, leading to the growth of wants and the growth of relations with outside civilizations. That's through war or barter. So with slave culture, we see the beginning of class society. So there is a slave culture in the tribal stage. Next, we have the primitive communism. Primitive communism, the ancient communal and state ownership, which proceeds especially from the union of several tribes into a city by agreement or by conquest. During this stage, the concept of private property begins to develop. With the development of private property, we find here for the first time the same conditions which we shall find again, only on a more extensive scale, with modern private property. On the one hand, the concentration of private property. On the other hand, coupled with this, the transformation of the plebeian small peasantry into a proletariat. So from tribal, it became primitive communism. Next, we have the feudal or state property. Like tribal and communal ownership, it is based again on a community, but the directly producing class standing over against it is not, as in the case of the ancient community, the slaves, but the usurped small peasantry. In the city, the feudal structure manifested itself in trade guilds. The organization of both the country and the city was determined by the restricted conditions of production, the small scale and primitive cultivation of the land, and the craft type of industry, which meant that there was little division of labor in the heyday of feudalism. So, in the feudal or state property, exploitation functioned differently during this stage than during the height of capitalism, because each feudal peasant knew exactly what proportion of his labor had to be handed over to the aristocracy and the church, and the rest was his or hers to use. And now we have the capitalism. Because of the eventual growth of commerce and of human populations, feudal society began to accumulate capital, which, along with the increased debt incurred by the aristocracy, eventually led to the English Revolution of 1640 and the French Revolution of 1789, both of which opened the way for the establishment of a society structured around commodities and profit. So basically, the word capitalism, it talks about commodities and profit. In such a society, the proletariat is fooled into believing that he or she is free because he or she is paid for his or her labor. In fact, the transformation of labor into an abstract quantity that can be bought and sold on the market leads to the exploitation of the proletariat, benefiting a small percentage of this population in control of capital. The working class thus experiences alienation, since the members of this class feel they are not in control of the forces driving them into a given job. The reason for this situation is that someone else owns the means of production, which are treated like private property. So that is for the development. Now, let's proceed to his hacks on education. Karl Marx sees society as an arena of social conflict. To him, function and role of social institutions can be best understood by its economic system. As per his doctrine, social institution education system strengthens existing class system that contains two main classes, the bourgeoisie haves and the proletariat have-nots. In this system, Hobbes owns the means of production, base and run the social institution, while proletariats have not the base. They can only sell their labor at cheap rate for their survival. According to their approach, educational institutions provide the workforce to bourgeoisie class. The ideology of ruling class is disseminated by education system which establishes a status quo. Two type of school system developed in society. So because of those ideas of Karl on the different stages of society, we have two types of school system developed, and that's public and private. Where public schools are for those people who cannot afford high fees and they are supposed to send their children to common masses schools. The other types of schools are private, in which those pupils get admission whose parents has more resources and life chances with power and wealth. These schools serve the purpose to maintain status quo for elites. In contrast, the public schools see the ideology of submission in the children of proletariats. Marx believes that current education system is reproducing social classes. The students pass out from the public schools have least social mobility. For instance, this perspective of Marx on education can be obviously seen in our times today, in our learning system as we transition from traditional to blended learning. Most of public schools, if not all, have actually prepared a modular learning delivery, which do not require necessary technology for the learners, while private schools opted to migrate to digital classrooms, which can be seen as a conflict of haves and have-nots. Take a look at this illustration where online learner is compared to a traditional learner, which we can obviously witness in our education system today, facing the challenge of pandemic. Because most of private schools in our country today can afford to offer blended and online learning. Learners can be holistically developed, but the traditional learner, on the other hand, could not enjoy the perks of learning physically because of our situation. So if you take a look at the illustration, the perks of an online learner, it has flexible schedule. He or she will be able to make their own schedule around other responsibilities. He can assure of the self-management, able to troubleshoot and monitor his or her own study. Of course, being an online learner, he or she is a tech-savvy, comfortable using computers and web technologies, and enjoys typing as primary way to communicate. As a media learner, he prefers to learn by watching videos and participating in online discussions. So all of these perks can be enjoyed by an online learner. And obviously, online learner are most of the students that we have in private schools. While the traditional learners, they can actually enjoy the perks of being a traditional learner, but in our times where gathering is restricted and face-to-face class are not recommended, so it's not really possible. But here are the perks of the traditional learner. Face-to-face likes being able to speak directly to professors and classmates. He has fixed schedule. He will be able to attend class at specific and regular times, and he can be a commuter willing to commute to a physical campus, enjoys the structure of a framed classroom environment. He will be able to use technology if needed, but prefers not to because of lack of access to technology. So that's it for our online and traditional. So you see, even today, we can obviously see the difference of haves and have-nots. As Marx claimed that education system supports the wealthy in society and helps them in perpetuating status quo, that means the students enrolled in elite school system have more exposure, facilities, and chances of getting higher position and social prestige in the society. Many researchers confirm the assumption behind Karl Marx's theory that elites maintain status quo in education system, as upper class have more resources and life chances to avail the opportunities and quality of education. So the students of this institution get higher positions in examination system and have more chances to get high education and highly paid jobs. Okay, but take a look at this. In today's generation also, the existence of these government agencies like the Department of Education, the Civil Service Commission, the Commission on Higher Education, and the TESDA, these government agencies resulted to a fair and just recruitment policies, which provided that there shall be equal opportunity for men and women at all levels of position in the government agencies, provided that they meet the minimum requirements of the position to be filled. So this is in terms of the government agencies. As time passes with a vital contribution of communist ideals, our government has continued to strengthen our education system anchored to the work requirements. So for instance, the minimum requirement to enter a government position is a bachelor's degree relevant to the job and the civil service eligibility. This does not contain the discrimination in status quo or in elite school anymore. This development that we have in our government service has been attributed to the social revolutionists like Karl Marx, because without their ideals, people will not be able to transition from slavery like that in tribal society to what we have now. Okay, that's for education. Now let's have Karl hacks on social change. Marx's theory of social change is much interlinked with his concept of social classes and class conflicts. Marx's focus on the process of social change is so central to his thinking that its shadow pervades all his writings. Marx declared that violence is the midwife of history. He was the most prominent and eloquent exponent of the conflict theory of social change, and he holds that change is caused by tensions between competing interests in society. Marx believed that the class struggle was the driving force of social change. Marx and Engels wrote in the Communist Manifesto, "All history is the history of conflict." Marx believed that the character of social and cultural forms is influenced by the economic base of society, specifically by the mode of production that is used and by the relationship that exists between those who own and those who do not own the means of production. History is the story of conflict between the exploiting and the exploited classes. This conflict repeats itself again and again until capitalism is overthrown by the workers and a socialist state is created. Socialism is the forerunner to the ultimate social form of communism. Thus, it is clear that the Marxism theory of social change is essentially conflict-oriented. It is appropriately called the conflict theory of change. Marx, as a conflict theorist, considers society fundamentally dynamic, not static. He regards conflict as normal, not an abnormal process, and he believed that the existing conditions in any society contain the seeds of future social changes. So there. Let's proceed to Karl hacks on economy. Karl Marx is a well-studied and well-cited economist. Marx believed that in a capitalist system, society would inevitably divide themselves into two classes. So as what we mentioned before in the social change, that the one who provides the production or the means of the production is the business owners, and the one being exploited are the workers. So it is the same in the context of economy. He's been a prominent voice in the debate against capitalism, writing the famous books The Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital, and inspiring many communist movements around the world. Marx's analysis centered around the social cost of giving up the value and ownership. All right, that's a short video biography of Karl Marx. And we watch the video, and we can come up with a realization that Karl Marx is really a communist, and that from being a communist, we can actually learn that social change is influenced by communism. And so we transition from different stages, but up to this day we can still observe, in some other instances we can still observe some ideals in capitalism. But in terms of, as we have mentioned in the slides, in my slides, and the education part, as we have mentioned, that in government agencies we do not have much consideration to the schools where the applicant graduated from. So basically, kung na-meet mo yung requirements, yung minimum requirements, if you have bachelor's degree, it doesn't, wala naman pong extra merit yung kung saan ka nag-aral. So government agencies, I just don't know where. In private companies, if they rely on, or if they put some extra marks on kung pag nasa elite schools ka nang galing. Alright, so that's it. I have put here the acknowledgement for the resources I used in my presentation, and thank you so much. And I hope you guys can comment and the stream, and yeah, I'm ready to answer any question at your most flexible time. Thank you so much.